My fiancé took me hiking, I came back 10 years later, and he never existed. The man I was going to marry doesn't exist. The doctors, my family, the calendar on the wall, they all tell me this. But even now, sitting in this sterile room that smells of antiseptic and quiet grief, I can still feel the ghost of his hand in mine. I can still hear his laugh. And that is the most terrifying part of all. His name was Silas. I met him 10 years ago, on a dead Tuesday night. I was 22, mopping up a puddle of something I didn't want to identify at a dive bar called the Gilded Anchor. It was the kind of place that was perpetually sticky, where the only light came from the neon beer signs that cast everything in a sickly, colorful glow. He walked in just as I was about to lock up, a silhouette against the rain-slicked street. He wasn't just handsome, he radiated a warmth that seemed to push back the damp chill of the bar. He had this easy smile and eyes the color of moss after a storm. He ordered a water, and we talked until the sun threatened to rise. He didn't just listen, he absorbed every word, making me feel like the most fascinating person on earth. That night, what should have been a lonely closing shift turned into coffee and waffles at a 24-hour diner. I remember tracing the condensation on my water glass, feeling a kind of electric hum under my skin I'd never felt before. It was fast, the kind of love that feels like a destination you are always heading toward. Silas was my anchor in a world that had always felt like a squall. He celebrated my obsession with low-budget 70s horror films, and I, after much convincing, learned to tolerate his passion for disappearing into the wilderness for days at a time. He coaxed me out of my shell, dragging my homebody self to bowling alleys, laser tag arenas, and sprawling house parties hosted by his seemingly endless constellation of friends. His favorite ritual, though, was the late-night hike, specifically through the dense, sprawling forest that loomed directly behind the Gilded Anchor. The same forest that had always given me a primal sense of unease. With him, though, holding his hand, the shadows felt less menacing. 6 months after we met, with his unwavering encouragement, I quit the bar. I started a small business restoring antique books, a niche passion I never thought could pay the bills. The money wasn't great, but for the first time in my life, I felt fulfilled. The worst day binding a crumbling 19th century novel was infinitely better than the best day scraping grime off the floor of the Anchor. 2 years in, at a 40th anniversary screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, he proposed. During Damn It, Janet, he dropped to one knee in the aisle, the sticky floor clinging to his jeans. He held up a simple silver ring, and the entire theater erupted. Our friends who had so seamlessly become my friends hooted and hollered, and we spent the rest of the night drowning in celebratory drinks and shared joy. My life was a perfect, sun-drenched photograph. I had a job I loved, a vibrant social life, and I was engaged to a man who felt like my other half. It was the morning of a 3-day weekend when he found me in the basement, pulling a load of laundry from the rumbling, ancient dryer in his house, which had become our house. "Hey," he said, his voice warm from behind me. "I found it. The perfect spot for a picnic. A real hike." I sighed, leaning back against him as I folded a towel. "Oh, Silas. Can't we just stay in? I feel like we haven't stopped moving since I moved in. This old house always has another pipe to fix or a floorboard to nail down." He wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my hair and kissing the side of my neck. "Come on, Cora. It's a holiday weekend. Just us. No friends, no projects. Just you, me, and the trees." The soft brush of his stubble against my skin sent a familiar shiver through me. He was right. Between work and wedding planning and our massive circle of friends, we barely had a moment alone. The thought of being lost in nature with only him for company was intoxicating. "All right," I murmured, turning in his arms, "just the two of us." A mischievous grin spread across his face. "The place I found has this little spring, a few hidden alcoves off the main trail." The implication hung in the air, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. "You're terrible," I said, swatting his rear playfully. He pinched mine in return before grabbing his hiking pack from the hook by the door. The drive was 3 hours to a sprawling national park I'd never heard of. I must have dozed off, because I woke to Silas gently shaking my shoulder. his face alight with an almost childlike excitement. "We're here," he beamed. "Miles of trails, a chance to really connect." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, blinking at the dense wall of green outside the car window. "Where did you even hear about this place?" "Sam and Frankie told us about it last time we went bowling, remember?" I frowned. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place the faces. Honestly, no. There are so many people and plans, it all just blurs together. "Good thing you've got me," he said, tapping his temple. "Mine like a steel trap." "More like a rusty bear trap," I teased, snapping my hands together like jaws. He laughed, a sound that always made my chest feel warm, and pulled into a deserted gravel lot. He had a plan, he explained. A long loop that would get us back to the car just before sunset. He'd even pre-booked a room at a small motel we'd passed, so we wouldn't have to drive back exhausted. He'd thought of everything. He always did. We set off. The air was thick and heavy with the smell of damp earth and pine. "Is that the same shirt you were wearing the night we met?" Silas asked, his eyes roaming over me appreciatively. "Maybe," I replied, grinning. "I figured I'd wear something old since you promised me an intense hike." I snapped my fingers in front of his face to break his gaze, and we both laughed as we walked deeper into the woods. It was strange, though. For a holiday weekend, the park was utterly desolate. The trails were clear, but there was a distinct lack of footprints that weren't our own. No distant chatter of other hikers, no crying children, no barking dogs. Just the crunch of our boots on the path and the whisper of the wind through the canopy. "I thought you wanted time alone," Silas said when I mentioned it. We had stopped at a scenic overlook, a cliff with a single weathered picnic table bolted to the rock. Below, the forest canopy stretched out like a vast undulating green sea. "I do," I said. "It's just eerie. You'd think we'd see at least one other person. It's a big place," he shrugged, dropping his pack on a table. He pulled off his shirt to stretch, and I watched the muscles in his back ripple. I stepped toward him, leaned against his warm body, and gave him a quick kiss. "Take a picture with me," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. He wrapped a strong arm around my shoulders, and I held the phone up, angling it to get the sweeping vista behind us. I snapped one picture. As I framed the second, a blur of motion exploded from the trees beside us. An enormous buck, larger than any I'd ever seen, crashed through the undergrowth, its eyes wide and wild. We both jumped. The phone flew from my grasp. I watched in what felt like slow motion as it tumbled through the air, end over end, before disappearing over the cliff edge. A faint, sickening crack echoed up from below. "No, no, no, fuck." The words tore out of me, hot and sharp. My phone. That stupid goddamn deer made me drop my phone. "Whoa, hey, easy there," Silas said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's okay." "It's not okay, Silas. All our pictures, everything, we'll get the photos back from the cloud," he said, his voice a soothing balm. "And that phone was ancient anyway. You've had it since before we met. I'll buy you a new one tomorrow. The best one they have, even if I have to sell a kidney." His calm, logical response chipped away at my frustration. We carefully made our way down a steep, winding path to the base of the cliff. It didn't take long to find the phone. It had landed squarely on a jagged rock, the screen a spiderweb of shattered glass. It was completely dead. Silas produced a plastic baggie and carefully placed the destroyed phone inside, tucking it into his pack. My heart ached with the loss of all those captured moments, a digital diary of our perfect life together. We continued onward, deeper into the forest, toward the spring he'd promised. The path led us to an old wooden bridge that spanned a deep, shadowy ravine. With every step, the structure groaned and swayed, the wood sighing under our weight as if in pain. I held my breath the entire way across, my knuckles white where I gripped the splintered railing. On the other side, we found it. A small, serene spring trickling out from a fissure in a rock face, pooling into a crystal-clear basin before spilling down into a stream. The sound of the water was a gentle murmur in the profound silence of the woods. Silas knelt, cupped his hands, and drank deeply. "Are you sure that's safe?" I asked, picturing parasites and bacteria. "You drink bottled spring water that's full of microplastics," he countered, splashing the cool water on his face. "This is straight from the source." He gestured toward a small mossy overhang behind the spring, his eyes darkening with suggestion. You know, we could. I shook my head. The anger and disappointment about my phone, still a sour knot in my stomach. I'm not really in the mood, Silas. I'm sorry. For a split second, something flickered across his face. A flash of cold, hard rage that was so alien it made the air feel thin. His smile vanished, his eyes went flat. It was there, and then it was gone, replaced by a look of quiet, understanding disappointment. But I saw it. Well, he said, his voice even. You should at least try the water? He gestured to the spring, his gaze drifting somewhere past my shoulder. Reluctantly, I knelt and took a small sip. The water was cold, but it had a heavy, cloying aftertaste, metallic, like licking a mouthful of old pennies. I was about to comment on it, but when I looked up, Silas was already walking back toward the trail, his back to me. The path looped around, and soon we approached another bridge, this one crossing a steep gully. It looked even more decrepit than the first. I insisted Silas cross first. He did, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet in the middle to prove its sturdiness. Satisfied, I started across. I was halfway over when it happened. A sound like a gunshot. A sharp, final crack of splintering wood that echoed through the silent forest. The world dropped out from under me. I plunged downwards, my hands flailing. My left hand caught a jagged piece of the broken bridge. I felt a searing, unbelievable pain as my fingernails were torn from their beds, but I held on. My body dangled over the gully, the weight of it pulling at my arm socket. For a brief, crystalline moment, I looked up at Silas. He stood at the edge of the broken bridge, looking down at me. And he was smiling. Not his usual warm, loving smile. This was a wide, predatory grin, a malicious curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. Then my grip failed, and the darkness swallowed me whole. Consciousness returned in shards. The first thing I was aware of was a wet, rasping sensation on my left hand. I blinked, my vision swimming. A stag's skull, bleached white and crowned with antlers, was leaning over me. Its impossibly long, gray tongue was methodically licking the blood from my mangled fingers. A scream clawed its way up my throat. The image dissolved, replaced by Silas's dear, familiar face, creased with worry. He was holding my left hand, which was now clumsily but securely wrapped in bandages torn from his shirt. Thank God, he breathed, his voice thick with relief. You're okay. He gently set my hand down and helped me sit up. My clothes were caked in mud, a long tear ran down my right pant leg, and my shoe was missing. My whole body was a symphony of aches and deep, throbbing pain. I tried to speak, but he hushed me. Save your energy. I'm going to climb back up to the trail. I don't have any signal down here. I'll call for help. I reached for him, trying to form the words to beg him not to leave me, but he was already moving away, scrambling up the steep side of the gully. I was alone. I touched my head and my fingers came back, wet and sticky with blood. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my concussion. It felt like hours had passed since Silas had left. The sun was gone, and a deep, starless night had fallen. I had to move. Forcing myself to my feet, I began the agonizingly slow climb up the embankment, my bare foot slipping in the loose dirt. When I finally hauled myself back onto the trail, the world was utterly black and profoundly silent. The wind had died. There were no crickets, no rustling of nocturnal animals. The only sound was the frantic drumming of my own heart and my ragged, gasping breaths. I stumbled back the way we came, my body screaming in protest. I found the spring again and drank greedily, ignoring the coppery taste. In a still pool of water at my feet, I saw my reflection. A skeletal, hollow-eyed stranger stared back at me. I recoiled, tears of terror and confusion streaming down my face. My head swam. My vision blurred at the edges. Cora, where are you? It was Silas's voice echoing through the trees. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. He came back. He rounded a bend in the trail ahead, and the relief curdled into pure ice-cold horror. Calling my name in Silas's voice was a thing that stood nearly 8 feet tall. Its legs were like a bird's, bent backwards at the knee. Its torso was a skeletal frame draped in loose, baggy flesh that shifted and rippled as if it were ill-fitting. From its swollen, bulbous head, 2 large antlers sprouted, scraping against the low-hanging branches. Its mouth was a mess of broken, mismatched teeth that clattered together as it tried to form a smile. It hunched over, trying to make itself smaller, more approachable. I was frozen, a statue carved from fear. The thing with Silas's voice reached for me with long, charred-looking hands. "You." Read, it rasped, the familiar voice struggling to escape that mangled mouth. Its fingers wrapped around my wrists. The touch was cold, like stone. Adrenaline shattered my paralysis. I screamed and ripped my hands away, turning and running blindly back into the suffocating darkness. Branches whipped at my face, roots tried to trip me. I didn't care. I just ran, fueled by a terror so profound it felt like it would tear me apart. I found myself back at the cliffside overlook, my lungs burning. Leaning against the old picnic table was a metal trekking pole, left behind by some long-forgotten hiker. The handle was wrapped in decaying electrical tape. I grabbed it, the cold metal a solid, real thing in my trembling hand. As I turned to flee again, a shape pulled itself over the edge of the cliff. It was the Silas thing. I didn't think. I reacted. I swung the trekking pole with all my might. The heavy brass tip connected with its shifting, amorphous face with a wet, thudding sound. A chunk of something that looked like wet clay flew off and splattered on the ground. It dropped to its knees. Flakes of what looked like ash began to drift from its body. The blob of its head reformed, the features swirling and settling into a grainy, flickering recreation of the face I knew better than my own, the face I had loved for 2 years. "I love you," it whispered. The voice was a pathetic imitation, like a parrot mimicking words it didn't understand. Smoke, thick and black, poured from the wound in its head. Its body convulsed, collapsing in on itself, becoming a confusing, indescribable heap of shapes before dissolving into nothing. Tears streamed down my face. I turned away from the spot where my fiancé had just ceased to exist, and I ran. I ran until the trees began to thin, until I could see a familiar, sickly glow through the branches. I stumbled out of the edge of the forest and collapsed onto asphalt. I was in the parking lot of the Gilded Anchor. A small group of people smoking by the back door saw me and rushed over as my legs gave out. The last of the adrenaline drained away, and as their concerned faces swam above me, safety, finally, blessedly, embraced me. The life I remembered was a lie. I had been missing for 10 years. On that rainy Tuesday night, the night I thought I met the love of my life, I had closed the bar alone. The security footage showed me locking the door, and then, as if in a trance, walking directly toward the tree line of the forest behind the building. The grainy video showed a tall, shadowy figure at the edge of the woods, seeming to gesture for me to come closer. And I did. My car was found the next morning. For 6 months, search parties combed the forest. All they ever found was my shattered, water-damaged phone and a single, mud-caked shoe. After years with no leads, I was declared dead. Somehow, I had survived. I weighed 70 pounds. I had patches of bald spots on my scalp. My body was a roadmap of poorly healed scars. The worst were the thick, ropey scars around my wrists and ankles. "Rope burns," the doctor had said, his voice gentle. "The implications of that are a horror I cannot let my mind touch." There was no Silas. There was no book restoration business, no proposal at the movies, no constellation of loving friends. My mind, they said, had built a fantasy. A beautiful, perfect world to protect me from a decade of unimaginable hell. It crafted a loving partner out of my captor, a perfect life to shield me from the cage. Even as the memories of Silas fade like old photographs left in the sun, even as I accept the cold, hard reality that he was never real, I miss him. I loved him. He was my soulmate. And when I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat from nightmares of a malicious smile and a splintering bridge, one thought always lingers, cold and sharp in the quiet of the night. He built that perfect world for me inside a prison of branches and bone. And sometimes, when the silence of this clean, white room is too loud, I almost wish I could go back. I almost wish I had taken another drink from the spring. Would I have ever escaped, or would I still be his, lost in the forest forever?